The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace like falling stars, and Captain Sung felt his blood turn to ice. 12 massive enemy ships circled the beautiful blue world below, like vultures waiting for something to die. Each savage horde dreadnought was 3 times larger than the biggest human vessel and bristled with enough weapons to crack moons. Energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning crystal cities into pools of melted glass. Millions of innocent people were dying below, and the humans had arrived too late to prevent the massacre. But they were not too late to stop it from getting worse. "Look at those monsters," Weapons Officer Jun whispered as he stared at the tactical display. The enemy ships were crude and brutal, looking like someone had welded guns onto flying scrapyards. Dark smoke poured from their engines and their hulls were covered in spikes and skull decorations. Captain Bo's voice came through the communication system from the Dancing Blade. "Sung, those are the biggest warships I have ever seen. Our entire fleet could fit inside just one of them." "Size is not everything," Bo Sung replied, though his own heart was beating fast. "Remember David and Goliath? Sometimes the little guy wins." The lead savage ship detected the human fleet and opened a communication channel. The face that appeared on the screen was a nightmare of scars and broken teeth. Massive tusks jutted from the creature jaw and its red eyes burned with cruel intelligence. "I am Warlord Krex," the monster growled in a voice like grinding metal. "You are tiny bugs. Leave now or we crush you like all the others. This world belongs to the savage horde. Their people will serve us or feed us." Captain Sung looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Engineer Ara was already working to boost their weapon power. Pilot Bin was plotting attack vectors on her console. Communications Officer Lee was trying to contact any survivors on the planet's surface. These people had volunteered to fly across the galaxy to help complete strangers. Warlord Krex Sung said calmly, "I am Captain Sung of the Human Defense Force. You are attacking innocent civilians. Withdraw immediately or we will stop you." The savage leader threw back his massive head and laughed like a hyena. His bridge crew joined in, creating a sound like demons celebrating in hell. "You will stop us," he gasped between fits of laughter. "You and your tiny toy ships. We have crushed 100 worlds, little bug. We will add your bones to our collection." But Sung was not impressed by threats. He had grown up on a world where storms could level cities and earthquakes could swallow mountains. Earth had tried to kill him every day of his life, and he was still breathing. One more bully did not scare him at all. "All ships attack pattern. Delta," he broadcast to his fleet. "Show them what Deathworlders can do." The human ships charged straight at the enemy formation like missiles aimed at the heart of darkness. The savages stopped laughing when they saw that these strange aliens were not running away. Most civilized species would have retreated when faced with such overwhelming odds. But humans had never learned how to run from a fight when innocent. Lives were at stake. The first human torpedoes struck Krek's flagship with the fury of newborn suns. These were not the elegant energy weapons that most galactic species preferred. These were crude, brutal fusion warheads designed to crack asteroids and punch through planetary defenses. They hit the savage shields and went through them like they were made of paper. "What sorcery is this?" Krex roared as his ship shuddered under the impact. "How do such primitive weapons penetrate our defenses?" His science officer, a smaller alien covered in scales, was frantically checking his instruments. "My lord, these are not energy weapons. These are physical projectiles with fusion cores. They explode on contact with maximum destructive force. No civilized species would build such crude devices." The dancing blade swept past the enemy formation like a silver arrow, dodging plasma bolts and missile swarms. Captain Bo pushed his ship beyond safe limits, using every trick he had learned in a lifetime of dangerous flying. His crew held on as their vessel twisted and turned through a maze of deadly fire. "Sung, this is Bo," the smaller ship captain reported. "I count weak points in their armor. These ships are built for intimidation, not efficiency. If I can get close enough, I might be able to punch through their hull plating." "Do it," Bo Sung ordered. "We will cover your approach." The Iron Mountain and its escort ships opened fire with everything they had. Particle beams, nuclear missiles, and kinetic projectiles filled space with deadly light. The human weapons were not as advanced as some galactic technology, but they hit with the raw power of a species that had learned warfare on a world that wanted them dead. Captain Bo lined up his attack run and pushed the dancing blade to maximum acceleration. His ship screamed toward the enemy flagship like a comet seeking its target. The Savage Point defense systems tried to stop him, but Bo had flown through hurricane winds and solar flares. Enemy fire was just another obstacle to overcome. "Bo, what are you doing?" Sung demanded as he watched the smaller ship on his tactical screen. "What humans do best," Bo replied calmly. "Whatever it takes to protect innocent people." The dancing blade struck. Warlord Krek's flagship at full ramming speed. The impact tore through the enemy hull like a knife through flesh. Captain Bo and his brave crew died in seconds, but their sacrifice took half the Savage command ship with them. The explosion lit up space like a new star being born. Warlord Krek survived the collision, but his ship was crippled and burning. Around him, the remaining Savage vessels suddenly realized they were not fighting another peaceful species. These humans built their weapons to kill, not just disable. They fought with the desperate fury of cornered predators. They were willing to die to protect complete strangers. The alien warlord had conquered dozens of worlds, but he had never faced enemies like this. Species that charged directly at superior forces. Warriors who used their own ships as weapons when their missiles ran out. Creatures that seemed to think dying for others was preferable to living with shame. "My lord," the scaled science officer whispered with fear in his voice. "What manner of beings are these humans?" Krex stared at the wreckage of his flagship bridge, and for the first time in his violent life felt something new. He felt afraid. These tiny aliens had just proven they were more dangerous than anything the Savage Horde had ever encountered. "They are Deathworlders," he said quietly. "And we have made a terrible mistake." Commander Juan pulled his unconscious sister from the wreckage of the Crystal Dawn and felt the ground shake beneath his feet. His beautiful ship lay scattered across the crystal gardens of New Harmony City like broken jewelry. Half his crew was dead, and the other half was badly wounded. Enemy fire had turned their graceful vessel into twisted metal and shattered dreams. Nari groaned softly as he carried her toward the underground tunnels where thousands of Velkan civilians had taken shelter. Her blue skin was pale from blood loss, and her breathing was weak. The ship doctor Keel followed behind them, carrying what medical supplies he could salvage from the burning wreck. The city around them was a scene from a nightmare. Crystal spires that had grown for centuries lay in glittering ruins. Purple flames danced across broken surfaces where Savage weapons had melted ancient structures. Bodies of civilians who had not reached safety in time were scattered like broken dolls. In the distance, Juan could hear the sound of Savage ground forces landing. Massive transport ships settled onto the planet's surface like metal mountains. Thousands of brutal warriors poured out of them, carrying weapons designed for one purpose only: to cause maximum pain and terror. "We need to reach the shelter tunnels," Juan told his surviving crew. "The civilians are counting on us to protect them." "But how can we fight them?" Commander asked Lieutenant Yan. He was limping from a broken leg and clutching a small energy pistol that would barely scratch Savage armor. "We have no heavy weapons, no vehicles, no chance against their army." Juan looked up at the burning sky and saw something that made his heart skip. Bright streaks of light were cutting through the atmosphere like falling stars. But these were not natural meteors. These were ships decelerating at speeds that would kill most organic beings. "Someone is coming," he whispered. The first human dropship struck the ground with enough force to shake buildings. It was a crude, ugly vessel built for one purpose only: to deliver soldiers into the heart of combat zones where no sane being would want to go. Steam hissed from its landing engines as assault ramps dropped with mechanical precision. Sergeant Yule emerged from the ship like death walking. He was not tall by galactic standards, and his equipment looked primitive compared to most military technology. But something about him made even hardened Velkan soldiers step backward. He moved like a predator that had never known fear, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who killed for a living. Behind him came 12 more human Marines, each one carrying enough firepower to level city blocks. They wore armor that looked functional rather than elegant, and their weapons were designed for maximum destruction rather than minimum casualties. These were not peacekeepers or police officers. These were killers trained to protect innocent life by ending guilty ones. You sent the distress signal, Yule asked Juan through a translation device. His voice was calm and professional, but underneath it was something that made the Velkin commander very glad these humans were on their side. Yes, Juan replied. We called for help from our allies, but you came instead. Who are you? Humans, Yule said simply. We got your message. We are here to help. Around the landing zone, savage ground forces were taking positions. Thousands of brutal warriors bred for conquest and trained for massacre. They carried plasma rifles that could melt steel and wore armor plating that could stop most civilized weapons. The odds were impossible even for trained soldiers. The Velkins whispered prayers for their strange rescuers. They did not know that humans had been fighting impossible odds since their species first learned to make fire. They did not know that Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, where everything from the weather to the wildlife tried to kill anything that lived there. Sergeant, how many enemies are we facing? Asked Corporal Mira as she set up her sniper rifle on a broken crystal formation. She was small even by human standards, but her movements had the precise efficiency of someone who had been killing things since childhood. About 3,000, Yule replied after checking his tactical scanner. Standard odds, then. The other Marines chuckled at what the Velkins thought was a joke. But humans did not consider being outnumbered to be unusual. They had evolved on a world where every day brought new ways to die. Fighting overwhelming numbers was just another Tuesday for them. Private Han began placing explosive charges around the landing zone with the casual efficiency of someone planting flowers. His movements were so smooth and natural that watching him work was almost hypnotic. He had been trained by the best military on a world that had been trying to kill his ancestors for millions of years. We need to protect the civilians, Juan told Yule urgently. There are thousands of families in the underground shelters. They are counting on us to keep them safe. Yule nodded and spoke into his communication device. All units, this is Overwatch. We have civilian protection duty. Anyone who threatens non-combatants dies. No exceptions, no prisoners, no mercy. The response came back from human units across the city. Understood, Overwatch. Civilians are priority one. As the sun set over the burning city, the first savage scouts approached the human perimeter. They expected to find another group of terrified refugees hiding behind makeshift barriers. Instead, they found something much more dangerous. They found humans who had come across space for the specific purpose of stopping bullies. The battle for New Harmony was about to begin, and the savage horde had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were fighting another weak species that would surrender when faced with superior numbers. They did not know they were about to meet predators from a world where only the strongest and smartest survived. In the underground shelters, Falcon families held their children close and tried not to think about the sounds of war preparation above them. Some whispered that their rescuers looked almost as dangerous as their enemies. They did not understand that sometimes you needed monsters to fight monsters, and humans were very good at being the right kind of monster. Captain Juan stared at the burning city below and felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. The beautiful crystal spires of New Harmony were melting under enemy fire like ice under a blowtorch. Purple flames danced across the surface of his homeworld as the savage horde continued their merciless attack. His ship, the Crystal Dawn, shook violently as another enemy blast struck their failing shields. Sparks flew from control panels and the lights flickered like dying stars. His sister Nari gripped her station with white knuckles as she tried to keep their weapons online. We trusted them, Juan thought bitterly. The Velkin people had always been peaceful. They grew crystals instead of building weapons. They sang songs instead of training soldiers. For 300 years they had lived under the protection of the mighty Zorax Empire. The Zorax had promised to defend them in exchange for rare crystal technology. But where were the Zorax now? The enemy fleet filled the sky like a plague of metal locusts. 12 massive ships, each one bigger than their entire defense force. The savage horde had come without warning and struck without mercy. They wanted slaves and resources, and they did not care how many innocents died to get them. Through the static-filled communication system, Juan could hear the desperate calls from the surface. Families trapped in burning buildings, children crying for their parents, old people who could not run fast enough. The crystal cities that had taken centuries to grow were being destroyed in hours. "Commander, this is Patrol Ship Evening Star." Lieutenant Yeon's voice crackled through the comm. "We lost main engines and are going down. Tell my family I tried to protect them." Hwan watched helplessly as the Evening Star spiraled toward the planet's surface, trailing smoke and fire. 12 brave Velkans died when it crashed into the crystal, gardens they had played in as children. The Crystal Dawn had started the battle with a crew of 50. Now only 30 were left alive. Their weapons were almost empty and their shields were failing. Around them, the last few Velkan ships fought desperately, but they were no match for the enemy war machines. "Sister, we cannot win this fight," Nari said, quietly. Her blue skin had turned pale from blood loss where shrapnel had cut her arm. The medical bay was full of wounded crew members, and their ship doctor was working miracles just to keep them alive. "I know," Hwan replied, "but we can still try to save someone." He made a decision that would change everything. Deep in the ship core was an ancient emergency beacon left behind by the first Velkan explorers. It had not been used in over 200 years. The beacon was designed to call for help from their strongest allies in times of desperate need. Hwan ran through the burning corridors of his ship, dodging falling debris and sparking cables. The emergency beacon was in a sealed chamber protected by thick crystal walls. His hand shook as he entered the activation codes that every Velkan captain learned, but prayed they would never need to use. The beacon hummed to life with ancient power. It sent out a signal across space calling to the Zorax Empire. The message was simple and desperate. "Peaceful world under attack. Civilians trapped. Send help immediately. We are dying and need protection." But space is vast and mysterious. Hyperspace storms rage between the stars, bending signals in strange directions. The message meant for the Zorax Empire bounced off a dead relay station and traveled through a cosmic anomaly. Instead of reaching the mighty warriors who were supposed to protect the Velkans, the signal traveled to a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. On the third planet from that star, Lieutenant Day sat at his monitoring station, eating cold noodles and wondering if anything interesting would ever happen. He worked at Deep Space Communication Array 7, which tracked signals from across the galaxy. Most days brought nothing but static and old commercial broadcasts. Then, his equipment detected something unusual, a distress signal, weak and distorted but definitely real. Day adjusted his instruments and tried to clean up the transmission. The message was in an ancient galactic language, but the computer could translate it. Someone was asking for help. Someone was dying and needed protection. Day had never heard of the Velkan Republic, but that did not matter. The signal was a genuine distress call from innocent people under attack. He immediately forwarded the message to Space Command with a priority flag that would wake up admirals in the middle of the night. Within hours, the human response fleet was preparing to launch. Captain Sung commanded the heavy cruiser Iron Mountain, while Captain Bo led the fast attack ship Dancing Blade. Neither man had ever heard of Velkans, but they had both sworn oaths to protect innocent life wherever they found it. The humans did not know they were walking into a trap meant for much stronger allies. They did not know that the savage horde commanded ships that could destroy planets. They only knew that someone had called for help, and that was enough. As the human fleet jumped into hyperspace racing toward a distant world under siege, Captain Hwan continued fighting his hopeless battle. The Crystal Dawn was falling apart around him, but he would not abandon his people. Every minute he kept fighting was another minute for civilians to escape to the underground shelters. The last thing Hwan saw before his ship crashed was the stars themselves. Even as his world burned, the universe remained beautiful and full of mysteries. Somewhere among those stars, he hoped someone had heard their desperate call for help. He did not know that help was already on the way. He did not know that the message meant for peaceful allies had reached warriors instead. Warriors from a world so dangerous that it had spent millions of years trying to kill everything that lived on it. The humans were coming, and they had no idea what they were flying into. They only knew that innocent people were dying, and that was something they could not allow. Not while they still had ships to fight with and crews willing to risk everything for strangers. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when Deathworlders decided to be heroes. The attack came at dawn when the first light touched the crystal ruins of New Harmony City. 3,000 savage warriors charged across the broken landscape screaming battle cries that had terrified dozens of conquered worlds. They expected to crush these small aliens quickly and then begin the pleasant work of enslaving survivors. Instead, they ran headfirst into prepared defensive positions that had been designed by minds shaped on the most dangerous world in the galaxy. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than they were. This was exactly the kind of fight they had been born for. Corporal Mira settled behind her sniper rifle in the ruins of a crystal tower and began her work. Each shot was placed with surgical precision, taking out savage officers and heavy weapon crews. Her rifle was a crude projectile weapon by galactic standards, but it hit with enough force to punch through armor plating like paper. The enemy soldiers could not understand where the shots were coming from. Mira fired from impossible ranges with accuracy that seemed supernatural. She had learned to shoot on a world where missing your target meant becoming something else dinner. Every shot was perfect because her life had always depended on perfection. Target down, she reported calmly after dropping a savage squad leader at 800 meters. Moving to secondary position, Private Han and his demolition team had turned the ruined city into a maze of death. They used collapsed buildings, subway tunnels, and crystal formations to create killing fields where numbers meant nothing. The savages found themselves funneled into narrow spaces where human weapons could cut them down like wheat. Han triggered his first explosive trap when a group of 50 savage warriors entered what had once been a beautiful park. The blast brought down 3 crystal towers and buried the enemy soldiers under tons of rubble. He felt no satisfaction at their deaths, only the professional pride of a job done properly. Trap 7 activated, he reported to Sergeant Yule. Estimate, 40 enemy casualties. Relocating to grid reference Charlie 4. The savage horde had conquered peaceful worlds by using superior numbers and overwhelming firepower. But they had never fought enemies who used the environment as a weapon. Every street corner held potential ambush sites. Every pile of rubble might contain hidden explosives. The city itself had become their enemy. In space, Captain Sung was fighting his own desperate battle. The Iron Mountain faced 3 savage dreadnoughts with only 2 escort frigates for support. His ship was taking terrible damage, but human engineering had built it to survive in environments that would destroy most vessels. Every system had backups, and every backup had emergency alternatives. Captain, we have lost main engines and half our weapon systems. Engineer Ara reported from her station. Her hands moved across damaged controls with the skill of someone who had learned to fix equipment while being shot at. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Life support is failing in sections C and D. How long can we hold together, Sung asked as another enemy blast shook his ship like a toy. Maybe 10 minutes if we are lucky, Ara replied. But I can give you one massive shot if you want it. Channel everything we have left into the main gun. It will probably kill us all, but it might take out one of their big ships. Sung looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These people had volunteered to fly across the galaxy to help strangers. They had families and dreams and futures waiting for them back on Earth. But they also had something more important. They had duty. Do it, he ordered without hesitation. Ara began the power transfer process that would turn their ship into a giant bullet. She rerouted energy from life support engines, artificial gravity, and every other system. The Iron Mountain went dark except for the growing energy buildup in its main weapon. The resulting beam cut through space like a sword of pure destruction. It punched completely through the first savage dreadnought, vaporized the second, and crippled the third. The Iron Mountain died in the effort, its crew sacrificing themselves to give the remaining human ships a fighting chance. Sung floated in the wreckage of his bridge, held alive only by his emergency suit. Around him, his brave crew had given their lives to protect people they would never meet. It was the most human thing possible to do. On the planet's surface, the tide was turning. The savage ground forces had been cut in half by human tactics and alien determination. But the real breakthrough came when young Nari, despite her injuries, managed to interface with the city crystal network. I can help, she told Sergeant Yule weakly. The crystals store information about everything in the city. I can show you where the enemies are hiding and how to coordinate your attacks better. For the first time in galactic history, 2 completely different species began working together in perfect harmony. The peaceful Vulcans provided intelligence and technical support, while the deadly humans provided the violence necessary to protect innocence. It was a partnership that would change the galaxy forever. The Crystal Network lit up with tactical information, as Nari fed data directly to human combat units. Mira could see enemy positions through walls. Han could time his explosives to maximum effect. Every human soldier suddenly had perfect battlefield awareness thanks to Vulcan technology. The last savage stronghold was a fortified position in the old city center, where Commander Krex had landed with his elite guard. 200 of the toughest warriors in the Horde had barricaded themselves behind energy shields and heavy weapons. It should have been impossible to assault, but humans specialized in doing impossible things. Sergeant Yule gathered his surviving Marines for one final attack. They were outnumbered 10-1 and almost out of ammunition. Most of them were wounded and all of them were exhausted. It was exactly the kind of situation humans trained for their entire lives. "Listen up, people," Yule told his team as they prepared for the assault. "Those bastards in there have been killing civilians all day. They think they can hide behind their shields and wait for reinforcements. Time to show them why you do not mess with innocent people when humans are around." The charge across open ground was something that would be remembered in military academies for centuries. 12 humans attacking 200 entrenched enemies, with nothing but personal weapons and absolute determination. They should have been slaughtered in the first few seconds. Instead, they broke through the savage lines like a hammer hitting glass. Yule took 17 wounds but kept fighting because that is what humans do. They do not stop until the job is done or they are dead. His example inspired his soldiers to push beyond their limits and accomplish the impossible. When the last savage warrior fell, the city of New Harmony was finally free. The surviving enemies fled to their ships and escaped into space carrying tales of the strange aliens who refused to surrender even when dying. The galaxy would never be the same. Victory had come at a cost that made even hardened warriors weep. Half the human fleet drifted dead in space, their hulls torn open like broken eggs. The beautiful ships that had crossed the galaxy to help strangers now served as monuments to the price of heroism. 2/3 of the Marines who had landed on Vulcan Prime would never see Earth again. Captain Sung floated in the twisted wreckage of the Iron Mountain, kept alive only by his emergency suit recycling system. Around him, the bodies of his brave crew drifted like sleeping angels in the cold vacuum of space. Engineer Ara had died at her station trying to restore power to save others. Weapons Officer Jun had been killed while manually loading the last torpedo. They had given everything they had to protect people they barely knew, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. 6 million Vulcan civilians were still alive because humans had decided to be heroes instead of walking away. The crystal cities could be rebuilt and the dead could be mourned, but an entire civilization had been saved from extinction. Sergeant Yule sat in the ruins of New Harmony City, with his back against a broken crystal wall. His body was held together by medical tape and determination. 17 wounds covered him from head to foot, but he had refused treatment until all his soldiers were cared for first. That was the kind of leader he had always been. Corporal Mira knelt beside him, checking his injuries with gentle hands. She had exhausted her rifle ammunition hours ago and switched to fighting with a knife when enemies got too close. Her small frame was covered in alien blood, but her eyes remained clear and focused on helping her sergeant. "How many did we lose?" she asked quietly. "Too many," Yule replied, "but we saved them all. Every single civilian made it to safety because good people were willing to fight for strangers." Private Han emerged from the underground tunnels, carrying Vulcan children who had been separated from their parents in the chaos. His demolition expertise had been used to clear rubble and create safe passages instead of destroying enemies. The same skills that made him deadly in combat now helped him save innocent lives. The children stared at him with wide eyes filled with wonder and fear. To them, he looked like a monster from their nightmares, all scars and weapons and barely contained violence. But his touch was gentle as he carried them to their worried families, and his voice was soft when he told them they were safe now. As rescue ships arrived from across the galaxy, the true scope of what had happened began to sink in. News networks from dozens of worlds sent reporters to document the aftermath. They found human soldiers sharing their emergency rations with hungry Velkan civilians. They saw human medics working around the clock to treat alien wounds using techniques they were making up as they went along, but they also found something darker. Footage of the battle showed humans fighting with a ferocity that shocked other species. Video records captured Corporal Mira systematically hunting enemy soldiers with the patience of a predator stalking prey. Combat recordings showed Private Han using explosives not just to kill enemies but to terrorize them into retreat. The galaxy began to understand that their newest members were not just another peaceful species looking for trade agreements and cultural exchange. They were something much more dangerous and much more useful. They were guardians who would cross space to protect complete strangers and killers, who would do whatever necessary to accomplish that protection. Commander Juan stood beside his sister Nari hospital bed and watched human medical teams work to save her life. The human Dr. Kim worked with precise movements learned from treating injuries in Earth's most dangerous environments. Her techniques were crude by galactic standards, but they worked when elegant alien medicine had failed. She will live, Kim told Juan with quiet satisfaction. The injury was severe, but humans have experience with trauma medicine. We have been patching each other up after disasters for thousands of years. Why did you come? Nari asked weakly when she woke up. You could have ignored our message. You could have decided we were not worth the risk. Why did strangers from across the galaxy sacrifice so much for us? Because you asked for help. Kim replied simply, that is what humans do. We help people who need it even when it costs us everything. 3 days later, the Zorax Empire finally arrived with a massive battle fleet ready to defend their Velkan allies. They had been delayed by political meetings and supply considerations. When they dropped out of hyperspace, they expected to find a conquered world and millions of dead civilians to avenge. Instead, they found human ships limping away from a battlefield they had won at terrible cost. They found Velkan survivors singing songs of praise for their rescuers. They found an entire civilization that had been saved by aliens who had no obligation to help them. Admiral Threx commanded the Zorax fleet from his enormous flagship. He was used to being the most powerful military force in any system he entered. The sight of primitive human vessels defeating the savage horde filled him with confusion and something that might have been shame. This is impossible, he told his tactical officer. How could these crude ships defeat 12 dreadnoughts? How could such a small ground force overcome the entire savage army? What kind of beings are these humans? The tactical officer studied the battle recordings with professional interest. According to our analysis, Admiral, their weapons are less advanced than ours, but they use them more effectively. They fight with a coordination and determination we have rarely seen. Most importantly, they seem willing to die for complete strangers. Admiral Threx stared at the wreckage floating in space. Each piece of debris represented human lives sacrificed to protect people they would never meet. It was a concept that his strategic mind could not fully process. In Zorax culture, you fought to protect your own territory and your own people. You did not cross the galaxy to help strangers. Commander Juan met the Zorax delegation at the temporary command post that had been set up in the ruins of the Crystal Palace. His arm was around his recovering sister, and his eyes held a mixture of grief and pride. Behind him, human soldiers continued working to clear rubble and help with reconstruction efforts. Admiral Threx, you finally came, Juan said without anger, but without welcome either. The battle is over. The civilians are safe. Your allies did not need your protection after all. We came as soon as we could, Threx replied defensively. Political considerations required careful planning. We could not simply abandon our other responsibilities to come running at the first sign of trouble. But they could, Nari said quietly, gesturing toward the human medics treating Velkan wounded. They heard strangers calling for help, and they dropped everything to answer. They asked for nothing in return and gave everything they had. Admiral Threx looked around at the scene of destruction and reconstruction. Human engineers were working alongside Velkan technicians to repair damaged crystal growth systems. Human soldiers were helping families search for lost relatives. It was not the behavior he expected from conquerors or even from typical allies. What do they want from you? He asked suspiciously. What price are they demanding for this rescue? Commander Juan smiled for the first time since the battle began. They want nothing, Admiral. They helped us because we needed help. It is that simple and that complicated. The galaxy was about to learn that some species fought not for conquest or profit, but for something much more dangerous. They fought because protecting innocent life was worth any sacrifice, and that made them the most dangerous allies and the most terrible enemies any civilization could encounter. News of the Vulcan rescue spread across civilized space faster than light itself could travel. For the first time in galactic history, peaceful species had allies who would actually fight for them instead of just offering thoughts and prayers. The footage from New Harmony played on news networks from the core worlds to the outer rim, showing humans doing the impossible. Children across 100 worlds watched recordings of human Marines charging through enemy fire to protect Vulcan families. Adults saw humans sharing their food with hungry refugees and treating wounded civilians with their own medical supplies. The galaxy began to understand that these newcomers were different from every other species they had ever encountered. 3 months after the battle, Ambassador Ray stood before the full Galactic Council in the magnificent crystal chamber on New Geneva. She was small and quiet by galactic standards, wearing a simple blue uniform instead of the elaborate robes favored by most diplomats. But every delegate in the chamber remembered the footage from Vulcan Prime. "You are wondering why we did it?" she said in a voice that carried clearly across the vast hall. "The answer is simple. Because you asked for help. Because innocent people were dying, and we could do something about it. Because that is what humans do when they see others in need."